the Deacon of Death, Samuel Smithers, and the Tampa Prostitute killings. Now we'll talk about a man of God who became a monster, a loving father who became a murderer, a man who sat in a church pew every Sunday, who by Tuesday had blood on his hands. This is the story of Samuel Lee Smithers, the so-called Deacon of Death, and a chilling case of betrayal, violence, and a deadly secret hidden in the murky waters of a secluded Florida property. Right now, as you're listening to this, Smithers is living out his final days on Florida's death row. On Tuesday, October 14th, at 6 p.m., the state plans to strap him to a gurney and deliver the final punishment for the brutal murders of two women, Christy Cowan and Denise Roach. If it goes through, it will be the 14th execution in Florida this year, a stark reminder of the ultimate price for the ultimate crime. But how did a man known to his friends as a good, devout family man end up here? What darkness was lurking beneath the surface of this seemingly average Tampa area resident? Stay with us, because the details of what happened at that secluded Plant City, Florida property in the spring of 1996, they are as disturbing as they are difficult to believe. Please like and subscribe if you're new to the channel. The family man with a dark secret. To understand the horror, we first have to understand the man. Samuel Lee Smithers was, by all accounts, a pillar of his small community, a devoted husband, a loving father. He was a regular at his church, where he was involved in his faith. The kind of person you'd wave to on the street. The kind of person who had a key to a neighbor's property because he was trusted. In fact, that trust is what opened the door for his crimes. In 1995, Smithers had a landscaping contract with a woman named Marion Whitehurst, whom he knew from church. Ms. Whitehurst owned a large 27-acre vacant property in rural Plant City, Florida, which she was trying to sell. The land was surrounded by a fence and a locked gate, and it featured a house and no less than 3 ponds. Smithers was given a key to the gate to maintain the landscape. It was a perfect isolated canvas for a man hiding a terrible secret. But Smithers' life wasn't just Sunday services and mowing lawns. Court records reveal a dark, compartmentalized life. Smithers would travel to the seedier part of Tampa, to Hillsborough Avenue motels, where he would pay women for sex. These were the very meetings that would set the stage for unimaginable violence. His first known victim, Denise Roach, was picked up by Smithers in this manner. The exact date is unclear, but records suggest it was around May 13, 1996. Smithers brought Denise to the Whitehurst property. What happened in those secluded hours is horrifying. Smithers later claimed she was trespassing, that he asked her to leave, and that an argument turned violent. He claimed she hit him, he punched her, and then she was pushed against a wall, where a piece of wood fell and struck her head. Unconscious, he left her. The next day, he returned to the body, dragged her to one of the ponds, and tried to wash the blood away. The second victim, Christy Cowan, was picked up days later, around May 26th. Smithers met her at the same Hillsborough Avenue motel. He drove her away off his normal route, through that locked gate and onto the same isolated 27-acre property. He paid her, they had sex, and then the transaction turned deadly. The official records describe the violence as extreme facial and head trauma with an axe and a hoe, strangulation, and possibly drowning. 2 women, 2 secret encounters. 2 bodies hidden in the same pond, all while the deacon continued his life, praying in church and mowing the grass. The bloody carport and the discovery. Secrets, especially deadly ones, have a way of leaving a trail. And on Tuesday, May 28, 1996, Smithers' secret left a very distinct, very red trail. It was around 7 p.m. Marion Whitehurst, the property owner, decided to stop by the house. When she arrived, the gate was locked, just as it should have been. She opened it, drove up to the house, and there, parked outside the carport, was Smithers' truck. She found Smithers sitting in the carport, calmly cleaning an axe. He told her he'd return to cut down some tree limbs. But the story didn't hold up. Whitehurst noticed something on the ground that made her blood run cold. A pool of blood. Smithers was quick with an explanation. He told her someone must have come by and killed a small animal. He assured his friend from church he would clean up the mess, but Whitehurst was deeply bothered. That wasn't just a small animal's blood. As she drove away, her unease grew until it became a certainty. She couldn't shake the image of Smithers and that blood. She did the right thing. She contacted the sheriff's department. Later that night, Deputy Skolnick met Whitehurst at the property. The blood in the carport had been cleaned up, just as Smithers promised. But when the deputy scanned the lawn, he noticed something else, something telling. Drag marks in the grass leading straight toward one of the ponds. The deputy followed the marks, down to the edge of the pond, and there, floating in the water, was the body of a woman. It was Christy Cowan. A dive team was immediately called in. As they searched the murky depths, the horror doubled. They discovered a second dead female body in another part of the pond. Denise Roach. In the span of minutes, 2 missing persons cases became a double homicide, and the primary suspect was the man with the axe who was cleaning up the blood, the Deacon of Death. The crumbling alibi and the confession. The investigation, led by the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office, was, in the words of a state attorney, incredibly thorough. They had 2 bodies, a bloody carport, and a suspect who attended church with the property owner. The crime scene search turned up damning evidence. A condom wrapper and a semen stain were found inside the house. Smithers' fingerprints were identified in the kitchen. Roach's DNA was found in the bloodstain from the carport, proving Smithers' small animal story was a blatant lie. And chillingly, shoe prints by the pond matched shoes later found in Smithers' home. Perhaps the most conclusive evidence, though, was a convenience store videotape. It showed Smithers and Christy Cowan together, an hour before Whitehurst arrived at the property on the 26th. Smithers had picked up his victim and sealed his fate on video. The very night the bodies were found, detectives went to Smithers' home. He agreed to go to the sheriff's office for an interview, insisting his wife join them. He was questioned for nearly 3 hours, where he was read his Miranda rights and waived them. He agreed to return the next morning for a polygraph test. When he returned, the jig was up. The polygraph indicated he was lying. That's when the dam broke. Smithers started making incriminating statements. He continued to insist his wife be present, and with her there, Samuel Smithers confessed to killing both Christy Cowan and Denise Roach. His story was a desperate attempt to frame his victims as aggressors. He claimed Christy Cowan had threatened to accuse him of rape unless he gave her money. In a rage, he grabbed the axe and struck her in the head. He admitted that after he dragged her, seemingly unconscious, to the pond, he could still hear her making noises. He went back to the pond and hit her in the head again to shut her up. For Denise Roach, he changed the story entirely. He claimed he was just asking her to leave the property, that she hit him, and he accidentally caused her death by shoving her into a wall. But the medical evidence tells a far different and much more brutal story. The medical examiner's testimony. In a court of law, a confession is powerful. But the physical evidence, the bodies themselves, they are the ultimate witnesses. At Smithers' trial, the medical examiner's testimony painted a picture of calculated, horrific violence that directly contradicted his self-serving version of events. Let's start with Christy Cowan. The M.E. testified that when her body was recovered, she had been dead for no more than a couple of hours. Smithers left her for dead, but she was alive. The M.E. confirmed she had multiple brutal injuries, an injury to her eye, a laceration under her lip, and a blunt impact injury to her jaw. And then, the blows that ended her life. A chop wound to the top of her head that penetrated her brain, and another chop wound behind her ear. She also had clear injuries consistent with manual strangulation. A horrifying piece of evidence was the foam cone around her mouth, suggesting she may have been alive and conscious long enough to inhale water and drown. The cause of death: strangulation combined with the chop wounds. Smithers had not only killed her, but by his own admission, he silenced her with a second round of blows when he heard her struggling in the water. Twice slain, Denise Roach's body told a tale of a different, but equally brutal, attack. Her body had been in the pond for 7 to 10 days and was severely decomposed, but the decomposition couldn't hide the violence. The ME found 2 slits in her clothing caused by a sharp instrument. Her face and skull were fractured, and most disturbing of all, 16 puncture wounds to her skull, several of which penetrated through. She also had injuries consistent with manual strangulation, including a fractured hyoid bone. Smithers' story of an accidental shove against a wall was exposed as a complete fabrication. These were not the actions of a man defending himself in a scuffle. These were the actions of a cold, calculated killer. On June 25, 1999, the jury delivered its verdict. Samuel Lee Smithers was convicted of 2 counts of murder. Despite his loved ones testifying that he was a devout, loving family man, or perhaps because of the depth of the deception, the jury unanimously sentenced the Deacon of Death to death. The aftermath: a father's plea. A sentence of death is a conclusion for the state, but for the families of the victims and the killer, the tragedy is never truly over. The appeal process began immediately, dragging the families through years of legal limbo. But at the sentencing phase, a moment of profound, painful humanity cut through the sterile legal proceedings. The father of victim Christy Cowan stood before the court. His daughter, he explained, had a troubled life. She struggled with addiction and had been in and out of prison. But he said she had a kind soul, a heart that saw other troubled women as troubled souls, not as worthless people. And then he said something remarkable, something that speaks to the true, complicated fallout of tragedy. He told the court, "I know my daughter, and in her natural state, without the influence of crack, she would not want Mr. Smithers to be executed. He wasn't there to demand an eye for an eye." He begged the court not to perpetuate violence in his daughter's name. He spoke about the horrific details of the murder he heard during the trial. The realization that after Smithers left her for dead, she was still alive, only to be further brutalized and finally drowned. He said he hadn't had an uninterrupted night of sleep in 3 years. But his plea was not for vengeance. He stated, "Like it or not, Mr. Smithers is one of us, and like us, he is also a child of God." He closed by saying he did not believe it was the state's place to decide when any person should die, that kind of judgment is something that only God is qualified to make. He asked the court to sentence Smithers to life in prison. He didn't want the brutal, sickening closure of an execution. He didn't want to live with the knowledge of more harm being done in his beloved daughter's name. It was a staggering display of grace and pain. But in the eyes of the law, the horrific nature of the crimes outweighed the father's plea. The death sentence was upheld. The deacon's long walk, the legal aftermath. A confession does not stop the legal machine. For over 2 decades, Smithers' convictions and sentences have been appealed and reviewed. The Florida Supreme Court has repeatedly upheld the original rulings. One of the key defense arguments throughout the appeals was the validity of Smithers' confession. His legal team argued that the detectives violated his rights by continuing the interview after he requested his wife be present. But the trial court and the Supreme Court ultimately ruled against him, noting that Smithers was read and waived his Miranda rights multiple times, both written and oral. He was told he could stop the interview at any time. The court found that Smithers insisting his wife be present was a request, not a clear and unequivocal assertion of his right to counsel, which is what Miranda requires to immediately halt questioning. Because he agreed to waive his rights and continue the interview with his wife present, the confession was deemed admissible. Another key argument was that the two murder charges should have been severed, meaning tried separately. The defense argued that combining the cases prejudiced the jury against Smithers. But again, the court found the facts of the two murders, the similar victims, the isolated location, the overlapping time frame, were so interconnected that they were admissible in a single trial. The pattern was key to demonstrating the identity of the killer. The years turned into decades. Smithers was 45 when he was sentenced. Now he's 72. And then, after 29 years since the crimes and 26 years after the sentencing, the final order came down. On Friday, September 12th, Governor DeSantis signed a death warrant for Samuel Lee Smithers. The date was set, Tuesday, October 14th, at 6 p.m. The clock is now ticking down to the final minute. Why the name Deacon of Death? This case has always captivated and disturbed true crime followers, not just for the shocking violence, but for the profound hypocrisy at its core. Where did the moniker Deacon of Death come from? It's a cruel, ironic nickname that encapsulates the true nature of his crime. It comes from his public persona, the man who served his church, who was trusted by his neighbors, who had a good reputation. His own loved ones called him a loving father and family man at his trial. The deacon was a mask. He was able to walk the line between the sacred and the profane, between the light of his faith and the darkest parts of his soul. He used the very things that made him appear trustworthy, his connections, his job, his key to a private property, to facilitate his horrific crimes. He took two marginalized women, women struggling to survive, and reduced them to a dark secret he hoped to literally bury. The truth is, he didn't just kill two people. He violated the trust of his community. He betrayed his family, and he committed an act that the father of one victim struggled to reconcile with his own faith. The case of Samuel Smithers is a chilling reminder of how little we often know about the people right next door. The true crime that endures is often the one where the monster looks exactly like a man. Conclusion and final thoughts. On October 14th, the long, painful saga of the Deacon of Death will finally draw to a close. For the families of Christy Cowan and Denise Roach, the day represents the ultimate closure the state can offer, a final, definitive answer. For others, like Christy Cowan's father, the act of execution itself is another trauma, another act of violence committed in the name of justice. Whether you support the ultimate punishment or not, the undeniable facts remain. Samuel Smithers lured two women to an isolated property, violently murdered them, tried to cover his tracks, and attempted to hide their bodies in the waters of a secluded Florida pond. The evidence, the medical testimony, and his own confession sealed his fate. When we look back on this case, we have to remember the victims. Christy Cowan and Denise Roach. Their lives were complex, but they were no less valuable. They were someone's daughters, and they deserved to live. Smithers stripped them of their dignity and their lives in the most brutal way imaginable. The irony of a man who served his church being the one who committed such dark, monstrous deeds is the suspenseful twist no one saw coming. The Deacon of Death will pay his debt to society, not in a church pew, but in the final isolated moments of a Florida death chamber. Let me know in the comments below.